Yeah. So what is the end goal here? Is it a global communism? Is it what is it?
Well, I mean, that's what they tell us. I was doing this on Twitter all day today, is going through and just finding all these big organizations and how often they talk about global citizenship. But what in the hell's a global citizen?
Right.
Well, you're a
Right.
citizen of the United States. I think you told me you're a citizen of California. I'm very sorry. Um, Womp womp.
Me too.
But but we're what is a global citizen? Well, citizenship is a relationship between a person within a political arrangement and the leaders of that political arrangement. In other words, between the sovereign and its subject.
Mm.
And there is no what is a global citizen then? A global citizen is somebody who's in a citizenship relationship with a global governing body, but there isn't a global governing body yet. So you do see this end goal of creating a global governing body and having people accept that kind of, oh, we're already global citizens. So of course it makes sense that we make good on our global citizenship agreement by having a global sovereign or a global government power that is going to outline our rights, our duties, our privileges, etc., and secure those, or whatever it is that this thing will imagines that it will do. um, I can tell you from other angles of things that I know that the goal is to have perfectly predictable and perfectly controllable economic and political subjects throughout the world. Um, so, using your algorithms through your devices, they make sure that you are propagandized politically and advertised to economically so that you will behave exactly the way that they want, so that their planned economy can work out the way that it will. Uh, and they have been experimenting with this under guises of psychological theories like nudge theory. I think a lot of people have talked about neuro linguistic programming, no less about that. Nudge theory has been like the big hot topic. So they give you psychological nudges. So you think you're making your own decisions, but they've actually kind of primed you with the information in ways that they think by analyzing your social media data or these kinds of fun quizzes people love to take about themselves, these little narcissism quizzes. What kind of princess are you? Which Super Mario character are you? And these are actually, microscopic pieces of a psychological battery, so they can find out a lot about who you are. And they tell you that the World Economic Forum has documents explaining that that's what these things are about, and that they use this fine-grained psychological profiling that they're building out of different people's identities so that they can then feed them through their social media algorithms information that will contour the way that they act and believe in particular ways. And so what they're looking for, and they don't have this yet, is a perfectly controllable economic and political subject in every person, which is total tyranny. The idea is, I think, for them to build chains so lovely and fine that we all love our chains and can't imagine being without them. But that's a grand dream, and things in practice usually don't go that well. I mean, you can look at how it is with their energy dreams, and then the power goes out because like it snowed or something, which is a bad time for the power to go out, by the way, because it's really cold.
Right. How does the whole climate thing play into this? The critical race theory and the LGBT, and then we have the Agenda 2030, right, which
Yeah,
is the push to
for
for the
sustainability.
green revolution. Whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all the same.
How are all of these?
It's all
Yeah.
the same.
So
So the Sustainable
go
Development
on.
Goals aim for an inclusive world. I mean, they tell you that the goal is a sustainable and inclusive future. So inclusion and all this woke stuff is tucked in there. How is it facilitated? Well, at the level of what works out as a corporate social credit score. They call it an environmental social governance score, your ESG score. A lot of people are now aware of ESG, whereas a year ago nobody had ever heard of it, even though it started at the United Nations in 2003. So it's old. It's been developing for a while. Well, what is the S in ESG? Well, it's social, which is short for social justice. You get your ESG score good in the S category by adopting woke policy. You get your G score by hiring the people they tell you to hire, which is usually woke activists, to put into positions like diversity coordinators or diversity officers, or hiring consultants to do diversity trainings, or hiring ESG officers. And then there it is, right next to the S, right next to the social, is the E, environmental. So the really two pieces of the same thing. And the environmental movement isn't just talking about climate change. It talks about something called climate justice, which has to take into account not just the effects of climate change, should those be real in terms of material damages, but how those are disproportionate to different racial and sexual and
Mm.
sex-based groups around the planet. So we have to pay attention to the fact that men use 10 times as much generate 10 times as much carbon, and women experience 2.4 times as much impact, and white people generate this much more, and black people in the global south or whatever have this much more impact. And so the entire environmental thing is splayed out in terms of the same social justice equity movement. So what you see is that they turn out to be the same thing, the same project run by the same people. Turns out that it's almost like having two different hammers, one in each hand. They hit differently. They're different objects, environmental and social, but they're kind of doing the same thing. But this environmental move actually has so much power. It's very difficult for them to decide to restrict your ability to move or travel or turn on your lights based on your identity. Oh, you're straight, so you can't have electricity on Tuesdays. That's not going to fly. Oh, but your city has used too much electricity, or you personally at your home have used too much electricity in the last 30 days. So for the next, 8 Tuesdays, you don't have electricity for the climate, or is totally plausible. In Oxford right now in England, they've divided the city up into zones. I was just there a month and a half ago. And they actually had signs up that said zero emission zone. And if you drive a vehicle that has emissions between like 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. in a zero emission zone, then you get fined however many £100. And they've divided up the city into these 5 zones now. And I don't know what exactly they're going to do, but they're going to do practice climate lockdowns where you're not allowed to leave your zone essentially for any reason. Maybe not even, except I think by bicycle and on foot is the only way you can leave your zone. And you can only be out of your zone like 100 days of the year, and like all this crazy stuff. They're going to practice
Even if you're on foot, only 100 days out
I
of the
don't know
year?
the exact policies. I just know
Okay,
that they're
okay.
planning to do climate lockdown simulations. They've
Yeah.
zoned the city. There will be restricted movement. You can't restrict people's movement based on identity politics and social politics, but you can based off of this environmental thing that they're trying to push. Uh, it,
Why do they want to restrict people's movement? Why is that important?
well, if you can't move, you can't get together, and your life becomes something that you have to plan more. Like for a lot of, I talked to some Soviets, former Soviets, and they were not like in the regime. They were actually oppressed by it, but they lived in the Soviet Union. And they told me that they said, "Do you know what the purpose of the bread line was?" And I was like, they had to distribute bread and they didn't care, and it's really slow. Because I've been to China, I've been to a communist country, I know how little they care. And they were like, yeah, but no. The real purpose of the bread line is that if you're standing in line twice a week, 6 hours at a time for bread, you're not doing anything else. So if you can't leave, if you can't go anywhere, then you live a restricted existence. Like, what are you going to do? If you want to have a meeting with somebody outside of your climate zone, you have to get on Zoom or something like this. Well, all they have to do is rig that up, or all that's monitored. And now you have no unmonitored communication with people outside of your zone, uh, which can be quite limited. If we go and look at what they do in China, you can't even get I think it's 50 is the maximum number of people you can have in one place without a government official present. Um, by restricting your movement, you facilitate those kinds of policies. You facilitate those kinds of controls over people. You also create a multi-tiered society where there are the people who are at the bottom who don't get to participate in much, and then there's the people who get special privileges, and then there's the people at the top who don't have any restrictions. And from what I understand, the goal would be a three-tiered society in that regard, which just becomes a powerful instrument of social control. Further, you create reasons to punish people for arbitrary almost infractions, which gives you massive amounts of psychological control over them. You create the ability to fine them for things
Right.
that don't seem out of the ordinary. So somebody commits an offense and you fine them, say $2,000. They can only handle so many of those per year, and then they're just kind of stuck in penury. They don't have any options. So it's a massive instrument of control over population. You can't get like what they did in China. Again, we go back to a real totalitarian communist state with techno communism as the tools. What did they do? These people decided to protest what was going on with the masking, with the COVID policy, and they went and they had these mass protests. And even though they didn't have COVID-19, the government said that switched their passports on their phones to red. Well, with that red passport icon or whatever it is, when you go to scan your QR code, you can't buy a plane ticket, you can't get on a train, you can't get a taxi, you can't get a hotel, you can't go into a restaurant, you can't go into a grocery store. So now you have all these people who decided to go try to protest the government. And because they have this passport scheme that controls how they're able to move, they can't go home. They're trapped where they are. They can't get in. They have to sleep outside with no food. This is an incredible tool of brutality um, that becomes enabled through. Well, sorry, we're going to have to set this kind of a program up so we can track your movement because we have these zones now. So there are a lot of reasons why they would want to restrict people's movement.
Mm.
If they restrict your movement, you have to have a passport to go out of some sort or another to get outside of the area that you are and to track how often you've done so. If they tell you you can only be out 100 days, there's got to be a means to track that. And if there's a means to track that, there's a means to track you and to control you, which they apparently can flip a switch and turn off if you're behaving badly. And so these are instruments of social control that are just terrifying.
How do they normalize that? How do they get people to trust them so much that people will accept that?
Well, that's becoming their big problem. Up until now, they've been slow walking it to the point where people have maintained an awful lot of trust, and then they've done a very good job of anybody who didn't trust them. Oh, you're like Alex Jones. You know, they have these kind of scapegoat characters. Oh, you're a crazy
Yeah.
person. You're like that. You have to be, not taken seriously. You're a conspiracy theorist. It's been a great year for conspiracy theories, hasn't it? And like the conspiracy theorists are like sitting at the 3 point line just dropping buckets one after another right now.
Yes.
So they do that through those kinds of social manipulations to where anybody who's saying something else you don't believe, and then you kind of slow walk it in. You really slow, like in Canada, just crept and crept and crept and crept and crept, and now we have the New York Post writing that they're no longer actually a liberal state; they're actually an authoritarian state, or at least that's what they reported. And so you slow walk it in, but now they have a massive crisis of trust because Donald Trump messed up basically everything for them. The curtain got pulled back a lot. Fake news was the meme of probably the century, honestly. Um, People have started to expose their agenda, have tied it back to their websites and their talks, and have made Klaus Schwab is almost a household name now as some kind of weird bad guy in charge of the World Economic Forum, making fun of like it's so bad that if you want to talk about anything, you just do it in a German accent, and people know that it's like, oh yeah, you're talking about those guys. So they've been able to get trust because people were complacent enough not trust them, but that
Mm.
has broken. And I see my mission, one of my missions right now in life, is to sow the greatest amount of distrust for them possible in the smallest amount of time possible. And so, but that's how they've done it. It's, well, why shouldn't we go along with it? Oh, well, it's just for our health. Remember when COVID-19 came out? I was like, oh, well, we should stay home. We shouldn't spread the virus. We do care about mom and grandma. I can't kill you, mom. I won't come over. And we all kind of voluntarily did it, not being able to see through it because we still trusted. I mean, who 5 years ago, who there were, what did you think of somebody if they came up to you on the street and said the CDC is totally corrupt? I don't believe a thing they say. You'd be like, what?
Mm.
And now you're like, you want to go to dinner? It's like we're friends now. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Because that's changed. But we
Yeah.
all trusted our institutions because in a high trust society and in a healthy society, which we thought we had, you can and should in some degree be able to trust your institutions. We thought there was oversight. We thought people that were doing corruption and illegal things would be called out for it. And it turns out that was not the case. And so I mean, I'm reminded of the most depressing conversation I think I had in 2022 was on an airplane with this guy, and he's like, "Yeah, they're just taking all the cars to these electric starts, and it looks like they're all going to be electric cars." And you know what? Well, that's what they're doing. We just have to adapt. And it's like, no, why? Why do we have to? Why do we have to adapt to whatever they are doing? And no, it's not always in our best interest. Um, And that mentality, I think, is a lot of how we got to that place. I can't overstate it though. John Stewart probably is one of the most nefarious characters in American history. If I were they say the winner gets to write history. Well, if I win and I write history, John Stewart's getting a whole chapter in the history book as one of the worst characters in the history of America, because he spent 20 years on a comedy show, and comedy gets inside your head, it gets inside your emotions, it works. He spent 20 years on a comedy show making out that if you're a conservative, you're a stupid, bad person nobody should listen to. And that mainstreamed. And so people who had dissident opinions got made fun of. They didn't get listened to. And it turns out they were right. So that's a huge piece of it too, is that we've completely discounted anything outside of the official narrative up until about 2 years ago.